Hello and welcome to the fourth video in our Ansible series. Okay, so as you can see, we have a slight amendment in our topology. We now have an app server connected to our topology. The app server is going to be providing things like our NTP, our TACACS, any HTTP that we want to actually be running as the labs progress further down the line. Okay, so let's get cracking with the actual tasks. So let's have a look at the scenario first. So the scenario is your manager has requested that you set up, yeah, I spelled that wrong. Anyway, set up and add the routers for basic NTP. You've also been told that the application server, which is running on Ubuntu itself, has not been configured for NTP. So while you're now a network automation engineer, your manager believes you should also take on sysadmin tasks. And you know, while this may not sound like it happens, it does. The very first day I started as an IP engineer at a company I worked for some time ago, my manager said to me on my first day, they said, Dickie, what you need to do for the rest of the week is to configure this whole group of Dell servers that are in one of the racks, and you need to configure them for basic services and things like that. And of course my first response was, but I've never worked on servers or on the like that. I don't know what to do. And, you know, he was like, raised an eyebrow and was like, you'll figure it out. So these things happen, unfortunately. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a look at the tasks. So basically we need to add the Ubuntu server and its variables into the current host file. And we need to write a playbook that will configure the application server to install an NTP package and to enable NTP server settings. Then we can build a playbook to add NTP to our routers and point it to the newly configured NTP server, and then create a playbook to verify our configurations on the routers. Okay, so just so you can see how this is actually being done, if you go to like ubuntu.com, go to download or get Ubuntu server, you don't need the desktop version, just the actual server. This is if you want to be running applications in your own lab. Ubuntu 24.04 2 lifetime support. It's quite small, 3 gigabytes in size. It's not very big, and I'm running it on a separate VM to the actual topology, but it's in the same subnet, so all my devices can connect to it, and it doesn't use an awful lot of resources. I've set this up with 3 gigabytes of memory, 2 processors, and 8 gigs of RAM, so it's not using a huge amount, and there's no GUI on this because this is the actual server application. If you want a GUI, then you download the Ubuntu desktop instead. Anyway, let's bring up our VS Code and let's get cracking writing our first. Oh no, we're not writing the playbook. We're doing our host file. Okay, so let's get into our host file. So our host file currently has our routers and our named routers and our edge. So what we need to do, we need to create another group now. So let's create it called servers, and let's put the address of the server. So app server, Ansible host. So I know the Ansible host, and the IP address I set up for that is 192.168.47.200. Sweet. Okay, let's set up its variables. Servers .vars. Okay, so let's do our Ansible _user, and I've called the username on this sysadmin, and let's do our password. So Ansible SSH pass equals sysadmin123. All right, let's do our Ansible become. See, Ansible become is to allow elevated privileges, so you can actually install things. Exactly the same as when you're on the Cisco CLI, when you go from privilege mode to conft mode. So like, or actually no, rather where you go from user mode to privilege mode, I should say. So in user mode, you can only do some basic show commands, and that's about it. In privilege mode, you can do some configuration, mind things like setting the clock and stuff like that. This is basically the same thing, just allowing you to actually become. So ansible underscore become equals yes. Okay, sweet. And now we need to tell it what method we're going to use. Unlike Cisco or any other vendors, Juniper, whatever, you only have one version to use, but you have multiple different types. But in this case, we're going to use sudo or super user do in this case. Ansible underscore become it should be underscores rather. Method equals sudo. Okay, and now we need to put the actual password as well. Ansible underscore become underscore password. Unlike what Cisco, I'm using the same. I'm not using a secret, or I'm not using a specific enable password. I'm just going to use the same one as what's set up on this. Sysadmin. Ooh, lovely. 1, 2, 3. Okay, wonderful. So let's save that. Okay, so that's our host files done. So we've done the first task. So the second task was to actually create our playbook to actually get this working on the server. All right, so let's create a file on that. Let's do a tut, and let's call it server.yaml. All right, and let's open that one up. In case you're wondering why these are all coming up green, it's because I'm using Git on here. So it's just basically telling me that these files have not been saved within Git itself, and therefore I've not pushed them up to the GitHub repository. I'll deal with that later on. Okay, so let's get cracking and set up our first playbook for this. So again, it doesn't matter whether we're configuring Cisco, Juniper, Arista, servers, makes no odds. We should always, by best practice, start our YAML file with 3 dashes, and you'll see that the actual syntax and the way it's written is exactly the same as what we've already been doing. So name is going to be NTP server. NTP server setup, that's what we want, and we need to tell it our hosts, and in this case it's going to be servers because that's what we built in our host file. And now we don't have to bother with the gather facts because it's not going to gather facts on this, but we do need to do if we want it to become equals yes, and now we need to give it the tasks. So let's do the first task. First task is we're going to install NTP itself, and we're going to use apt, and then we're going to give it the name of the package we want to install, and in this case it's called Chrony. I don't know why they called it that. It's a really weird name. And now we need to give it what state we actually want it to be. So the state basically means, so if we do present, we want the actual state to be present. So we want this particular application to be on the server. Now, once you've got an application on the server, if you change the state to say absent, then it will remove that application that's on there. So you can just, by changing the state from present to absent, you can actually add or remove a particular package. Okay, so what we also want to do is update the cache. Okay. Right, so that is the first part of the task. Right, so the next part we need to do is, let's go back a bit, is we need to configure it as an actual server, because all we're doing so far is just installing the NTP package. We need to actually get it set up as a server. Okay, all right, so let's do so line in file. So what we're doing is that we're actually writing a particular file on the actual server itself to tell it to become an actual server rather than just have NTP. So we need to tell it what path of the file that we actually want, which is going to be it's in etc. Chrony, and it's chrony.com if I remember rightly. Chrony.cfg. All right. And now what we're going to do, we need to do a regular expression. So let's do this. Regular expression. And we'll put that in our quotations. Sorry, didn't want a space there, but that's where I want one. Okay, and let's do our line. This is what actually, when it says line, this is what like a comment, like what we would put if we was just putting a comment into a, let's say we was doing a reload from, say we do a reload comment, so anyone that goes through the actual logs can see what you've actually done. So line, and let's do a comment, and don't forget the pound symbol when you're doing a comment in any files like that is basically, you know, it's not part of the configuration, it's kind of, you know, blanked out, it's all commented out. Committed by on video. Yeah, lovely. All right, brilliant. Okay, so we need to also do the state as present again on this, because the idea is that if we push this on, and because this is a completely new task, the first task is installing the package, the second task is adding data into the actual configuration file as well. So we want the state to be present, because if we don't do this, or we just want to remove that, we can change the state again to say absent. Okay, fantastic. All right, so what we need to do now we need to do another task on this. Let's get back there. And the next task we're going to do is actually we're going to add the local server configuration on this. So name, add server configuration. Fantastic. Okay, so let's do our line in file. Line in file. And we're going to use the same file name again. So so it's going to be the exact same path. So in fact, I'll copy that, to be fair, rather than typing it back in, because I'm lazy. There we go. So line in path. All right, so what we're going to do with this is now we're going to tell it what subnet to actually it's supposed to be working on. So line, so allow is going to be 192.168.47.0/24. Okay, that's great. And now we want it to actually create that for us. Brilliant. Okay. Now, I promise only two more little bits. What we need to do, we need to restart the actual service. The reason we need to restart it is because we've installed it already. And then so as far as the system is concerned, it's up and running. But then we've been making amendments to it. We've added 2 new lines to the actual, or 3 new lines actually, to the actual configuration file. So we need to restart the service so it can actually apply those new settings that we've actually put in. Okay, so we're going to call it restart NTP, and what we're going to use, the system management on this. SYSTEMD, or basically the system management daemon is what we're going to actually use. Okay, so we're going to enable the actual daemon, and then we're going to put its state has been restarted. All right, okay, so that is all we really need to do, but we're going to do one more thing. We're going to ensure that NTP port 123 running on UDP is actually enabled in the actual firewall as well. The last thing we want to be able to do is to get everything up and running, and of course, you know, port 123 is not allowing anything. When you're dealing with Linux, it's quite finicky. You know, there's lots of things that you want to do. I mean, one of the biggest problems with Linux is things like file permissions. Even something simple, you create a file, but you can't write to it, or you can't do anything with it because you've not been allocated permissions for it. It's bananas. Great operating system, very flexible. You could do so much with it if you've never used it before. But it's a complete absolute pain for a lot of things, and things like permissions is one of them. Let's do allow firewall for that one. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to use the inbuilt firewall. So and it's called UFW. You can use things like IP tables as well if you want to. So let's add our rule. So the rule is going to be allow. I know this is dragging on a little bit, and I'm sorry. I know this isn't actually, you know, Cisco or networking, but it's still Ansible and still network operation, and guaranteed at some point in the future your boss will actually ask you to do something you've never done before. Port 123. Protocol is going to be UDP, and let's stick a comment in there. You don't have to put comments on, but it's best practice. Again, if anyone goes in, even though this is in a lab scenario, so the only person that's going to go into my stuff is me, but you know, in production, if anyone goes in, looks at the logs, they want to know what people have actually been doing. Okay, that should be it. All right, so we have our hosts, so we're going to use only the servers. Become with an is yes, so that's fine. And don't forget, in the host file we actually put the become method, the sudo, and the become password as well, so that's fine. Task, we're going to install Chrony, you know, which is great. I don't know why they name some of these packages as they do. We're going to set it up as a server in another task, so basically all we're going to do is edit the actual Chrony configuration file. Then we're going to edit the configuration file once more to allow the actual subnet that we're using. And we're going to restart the actual Chrony application, and then we're just going to ensure that it's allowed in the firewall. So let's have a little look and see what happens with this. So let's do Ansible Playbook, and it's server. All right, just wait for this to go through. All right, okay, so we can see it's installed the app server. So app server is okay. That's good. Not as quick as what it's normally doing in when we're doing some base configurations on the Cisco devices, because it has to pull these packages, basically from the interweb. Okay, so there we go, and it's actually changed 4 things. So we should now have NTP up and running. A couple of things haven't been changed because I've used this server before a few times for NTP, so the likes of the firewall rule that was already there, so that's why we got 6 okay. Not all 6 were changed, but we've installed the actual app, so it says here change on there. We've actually installed the app server, installed the NTP package, we've set it up as a server. I already had that configuration file there, so I didn't need to do anything. We've restarted NTP as well, and we've added it into the firewall. All right, so that's fantastic. What we need to do now is we need to do another playbook so we can actually configure our devices so they can connect to the actual NTP server itself. So let's clear that, and let's do touch. You think after all these years of using the keyboard I'll actually be quite fast, but I'm an old man practically, to be fair. So touch NTP add.yaml. All right, and let's open that up. All right, remember 3 lines, name, add NTP, and host. Now, because we actually have the server as well in our host file, I don't want to do all, because then it's going to try and attempt to connect to the server and push Cisco configuration, which is not what we want to do. So I'm just going to tell it to actually use the groups edge and routers. Okay, that's fantastic. We're not going to gather facts. Connection is going to be our network CLI. As I said before, you don't have to do this really, because we have it declared in the actual host file itself. The tasks, name, add NTP, and now we're going to use the Cisco iOS config. So cisco.ios.config, ios underscore config command, and the lines we're going to put in there is NTP server. So NTP server 192.168.47.200, and we're going to prefer, and we're going to do a minimum polling of 4 and a max polling of 4. Reason we're doing minimum and max polling is, you don't have to do this, but it takes a long time. If you've used played around with NTP, it takes a long time for the Cisco devices to actually trust an NTP server. It has to continually poll it and poll it and poll it. It normally polls every like 64 seconds or so as standard. When we do a minimum poll of 4, then it will kind of poll it at every 16 seconds instead, so it can reach its maximum amount of polling before it determines that the NTP server is genuine a lot quicker. Okay, so that's all we need to do for this task. We don't need to do anything else. All right, so let's save that and let's apply that. So the Ansible Playbook, and we've called it NTP add.yaml. Okay, so there we go. It's put changes on. Brilliant. So you notice how when you start get faster actually writing your playbooks, I mean, I would not have been able to have added this as, you know, in the same amount of time if I went manually onto all these devices, and there's only like what 8 routers there. So we got to the point now where we can write a very, very quick playbook and still get it done before, you know, if we've done it on particularly 8 devices. So that's not bad. So as you can see, that configuration has now been done. So now the next task was to verify. So let's do another quick playbook to actually verify our NTP. So let's do touch show NTP dot YAML. No, sorry, that was spelled that wrong. Let's remove that. There we go. No, that's better. All right, let's edit that file then and get this up and running. Where's my show NTP YAML? There we go. All right, so remember our 3. I'm not going to keep telling you to remember this. Yeah. Name show NTP hosts, and it's going to be edge and routers. Yeah, connect. Let's go on CLI. Okay, task. So we're going to call it a name. Show NTP stuff. Yeah, that's good. All right, so it's going to be cisco.ios.command, and then we're going to do our lines. Show NTP IATIONS, and my spelling is atrocious as well, by the way. You've probably already gathered that. And show NTP status. All right, okay, so what we want to do, we also want to register the output so we can see it in the actual command line in the terminal. We'll just call it output this time. Okay, name show output, debug msg, and it's going to be output.std out underscore lines. Okay, that should do the trick. Let's save that and let's run that playbook and see what happens. So Ansible playbook, and we've called that show. All right, okay, I spelt that wrong. iOS, save that again, clear that, and let's run. All right, let's see what happens with this. Okay, there we go. So it's showing NTP stuff. All right, okay, so let's scroll up. What have we got here? Okay, So let's have a look, say R1. Okay, so we can see that it's actually got the NTP peer. Stratum is still 16. System is the clock is still unsynchronized. It does take a while. You notice how the poll is at the moment, or the reach is actually still only 16. It will actually go up as time goes by on this. But there we go. We have still, I mean, if we gave it like 10 minutes maybe, then they would actually be completely and utterly synchronized up. But it does take a little while. Let's have a look. Anything else on here? They still all in the same. Still at the moment, they're still the same. But even so, we've still got NTP configured on the device, and we have NTP configured on our actual server, which is exactly what we want. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed that. So let's have a look and see where we're Git status. Have a look at our Git status. Let's add that. Git add. Let's add everything. See, all those red files, that basically means that it's not tracking everything. Let's have a Git status now. All right, so it's now tracking everything. Let's do a git commit space m live on cam. Committed all of these files to my Git. If you want me to do some videos on how to use Git, then let me know and I can do that for you. Let's have a look at the status. So there's nothing there to be done, just needs to push. And if we have a look at the GitHub repository at the moment, all we have in lab 4 is the readme, the ansible file, and the hosts. So let's go back to here and let's push this. Okay, so it's pushed it. All right, let's have a look now back on the GitHub repository. Let's refresh that. And as you can see, it's put everything in there. So the reason I use Git, so you don't have to use Git, you know, in your own personal lab environment, but it saves me having to write everything out once, then copy it all out and put it into the GitHub repo for other people. It just saves me work. But you will find that if you're doing this in production for work, you will probably be using Git for your version control. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. In the next video, we're going to crack on with creating users and all manner of good stuff.